Hello and good morning or good afternoon or good evening to everyone watching this video. Thank you so much for being here with me today and to watch my presentation on the Battle of Iwo Jima. My name is Mehdi Lagel, and today I'll be taking you through one of the most, I guess you could say, pivotal and intense battles of World War II, which is the Battle of Iwo Jima. So this battle, it did not only shape the outcome of the Pacific Theater, but it kind of also revealed very powerful human stories of sacrifice and leadership and perseverance, which include some that for too long have been left out of our history books. So let's set the scene really quick. So the Battle of Iwo Jima lasted just over, I'd say, a month, from February 19th to March 26th of 1945. But its impact was very massive and very brutal. It was a pretty brutal clash between America and Japan, both the American forces and the Japanese forces. It had intense fighting and a very high death toll and very strategic significance, you could say. But beyond the military tactics and maps, this was a story about courage. Both sides endured very unimaginable hardship. Much of what I'll share today comes from primary sources like Okinawa, The Last Battle, and African American Voices from Iwo Jima by Clarence Willey, and official historical archives. So, where is Iwo Jima? Where is their location? It's a very tiny volcanic island, just about 8 square miles. It's located about 750 miles south of Tokyo. It's sat right between the Mariana Islands and the Japanese mainland, which made it very incredibly important for U.S. air strategy. As tiny as it was, its location made it a prime piece of real estate in the Pacific War. So, why was Iwo Jima so important? Why did it really matter so much? Primarily because it served as a very critical emergency landing spot for B-29 bombers returning from missions over Japan. Controlling Iwo Jima also allowed the U.S. to station escort fighters and significantly reduced air losses during raids. And capturing the island would essentially blind Japan's early warning radar system, which would open the door for deeper attacks. So let's take a look at Japanese defense. The Japanese, which of course knew its value, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, who was the commander, turned Iwo Jima into basically his fortress. He had more than 21,000 troops on the island. But what's really incredible is how they were deeply embedded underground in a web of just bunkers and tunnels, and had hidden artillery. So basically, their whole strategy was to inflict maximum damage and cause as many American casualties as possible. So what was America's objectives? So the U.S. They launched Operation Detachment, which basically aimed to seize Iwo Jima as quickly as they can. Um, Ideally, they wanted to seize it in just a few days, but their main targets were the three airfields on the island. But here's where things went sort of sideways. American intelligence had underestimated the strength and the design of Japanese defenses. They didn't really expect to be walking into a very deadly underground maze. And as for their pre invasion, before the boots hit the beach, as you could say, the U.S. unleashed over 70 days of naval and aerial bombardment, which was the longest and heaviest in the Pacific War. But it shockingly had very little effect. The Japanese were so well dug in, they just waited it out in their tunnels, and the Americans all assumed that the island would be in ruins. Instead, they met a fully intact and deadly resistance. So, for the invasion, which was on February 19th, 1945, the 4th and the 5th Marine Divisions landed on the beach. But the island's black volcanic sand was so thick and so soft, it made moving, let alone fighting, very incredibly difficult. As soon as Marines stepped onto the beach, they were immediately hit with just intense hidden fire, like they didn't know where any of this was coming from. And over 30,000 troops landed that first day. Many really did not make it off the beach. So the struggles that took place on the beach. So every inch of movement came basically at a cost. Machine gun fire from bunkers, mortar shells from above, and little to no cover. The rough terrain made it, I guess you could say, almost impossible to bring in supplies or even just evacuate the wounded. And through it all, medics, many of them just teenagers, were running under fire, saving as many lives with nothing more than courage and just a stretcher. So, the battle for Mount Suribachi. So, Mount Suribachi sat on the southern tip of the island. It was a natural fortress and a very key objective. It took at least 5 days of just brutal fighting to take it, using flamethrowers, grenades, and close combat was very, very essential. Capturing Suribachi, it gave the U.S. a tactical edge, as I would say. It was the first major victory in the battle. So let's move on to the very famous flag raising on Mount Suribachi. It came down to be one of the most iconic moments of the war. On February 23rd, there were two flags that were raised on Mount Suribachi. The second raising was captured by photographer Joe Rosenthal, and this image became a very big symbol, very well-known symbol of the U.S. Marines and their bravery. It inspired war bond drives. It skyrocketed the morale back home, and it became the basis for the Marine Corps War Memorial, which is held in Arlington. So let's look at the Japanese resistance tactics. So the Japanese, they didn't go down easy. They avoided open combat. Instead, they really relied on attrition, slowly grinding down US forces. They launched night attacks, they used snipers, and struck from tunnels that made it nearly impossible to predict their movements. And very, very few surrendered. Their orders were to, quote unquote, fight to the death. So let's look at the US tactics and how they adapted. So the US had to make a big adjustment. So close quarters combat, it became very standard. The Marines, they used flamethrowers, they used tanks, and they used bulldozers to seal up tunnel entrances. Coordinating became very crucial. Basically, every step forward meant working together to survive the chaos. So let's look at the African American Marines and their roles. Now, this is a part of history that doesn't really get enough recognition or enough spotlight. African American Marines, they served primarily in segregated support units like the 8th Ammunition Company. They ran ammunition and all the supplies to the front lines while being under fire, without the recognition they deserved. Their work was absolutely 100% vital, even while facing racism from within their own military. So let's look at some personal experiences of African American Marines. One big example, which this one really shocked me, I had no idea about this, is Bill Greason. He survived Iwo Jima, and he went on to become a minister and later the first black pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals. Like, that really kind of opened my eyes as me being a baseball player myself. I had no recollection of this. I thought this was really cool to learn about. And others like those interviewed by Clarence Willey, they spoke of the double burden of combat and discrimination. But through that, they really found pride, they built morale, and they really helped pave the way for civil rights in the military. So let's look at northern Iwo Jima. So as the Marines moved north, the fighting only got worse. The terrain became more rugged, with ridges, caves, and very dense tunnels. And every Japanese position was basically designed to slow the advance, which meant every push cost lives. Every inch had to be earned. So let's take a look at General Kuribashi's leadership. So his leadership basically, and himself, just basically stands out in history. He refused to order mass suicide attacks, which instead he just told his men to maximize American losses. Like, basically, he just said to kill as many Americans as you can. He stayed with his troops until the very end, which led from the front. Rare leadership in such a brutal context, as I can explain it. So let's look at the final assault. On March 25th, the Japanese, they launched one final banzai attack. More than 300 soldiers, they stormed the U.S. positions at night. By the next day, which was March 26th, the island was basically declared secure. But believe it or not, some Japanese soldiers, they hid in tunnels for weeks, even years. Afterward, they still refused to surrender. So we're going to look at the casualties of the battle. What was the cost? It was pretty devastating. The U.S., we suffered over 26,000 casualties, which including 7,000 deaths. But Japan lost more than 21,000 men, with fewer than 1,000 captured alive. This, let alone, became one of the bloodiest battles in the U.S. Marine Corps history. So let's look at the medical evacuations. Who were basically the unsung heroes? The medics, or they were known as the docs. They carried the wounded across open fire and basically just improvised treatment with very, very minimal supplies. And they risked their lives dozens of times, basically a day. Many were later awarded medals for their bravery, but some didn't even live to receive them. The African American service legacy. So the African American Marines, their performance contributed really to something bigger. It really helped lead to Executive Order 9981 in 1948, which is basically the desegregation of the armed forces, with groups like the Montford Point Marines. They provided that courage has no color. So what was the major psychological impact for these soldiers? For the many that survived this war, it never ended on March 26th. It's always stuck with them. And PTSD was a very big widespread, though they didn't call it that back then. Some veterans really kept their stories locked away for decades and really kept it to themselves. Others found comfort in each other, and they really build communities of shared experience. Their pain really deserves recognition. So let's take a look at the Medal of Honor recipients. So there were 27 Medals of Honor that were awarded. They were awarded to 22 Marines, and five of them were awarded to Navy personnel. It's the most ever given in a single Marine battle, with heroes like Herschel Woody Williams and Jacqueline Lucas, who showed very extraordinary valor when survival seemed impossible for them. So Woody, or Herschel, is the top picture, and Jacqueline is the bottom. So let's look at basically just the battle's legacy in U.S. history. So Iwo Jima is still taught to this day in military academies. It appears in films like Flags of Our Fathers, and it continues to shape combat training today, which above all, it's an emblem of Marine Corps pride. What are some lessons from Iwo Jima? Like, what can be taken away from it? There's a lot of lessons from this battle, for military strategy and for humanity. The importance of preparation, the true cost of war, the value of every role, whether on the front lines or behind them, and really how racial inclusion, even under pressure, it made the military and the nation much, much stronger. So let's take a look at the cultural significance. So the image of the flag on Mount Suribachi is more than a photo. It's basically just a symbol of sacrifice and unity. It's embedded in our modern art today, embedded in our history books, and at our national memorial, which is held in Arlington, as I said previously. So let's take a look at the role in Pacific War strategy. So capturing Iwo Jima, it gave the U.S. basically a foothold closer to Japan. It made bombing runs more effective, and it set the stage for Okinawa, which was a final step before the atomic bomb decisions. Some historians even say that it really helped avoid a mainland invasion, which could have been far, far worse. So let's take a look at the aftermath for Japan. So for Japan, the loss was very catastrophic. It really broke their morale, and it exposed them to deeper air raids, and just it weakened their radar network. It really signaled the beginning of the end, as basically you could say. So the African American Marines post-war impact. After the war, many African American Marines, they became leaders in their communities. Some became pastors, some became educators, and some even became public servants. They really shared their stories, and they really fought for civil rights. And now they can pass their legacy to future generations like ours. So remembering the sacrifice. So today, I know this is just a history presentation, but this is also me just honoring them through reunions and memorials and oral history projects like this one. Their names are inscribed in granite. Their stories are etched into the hearts of the families and the history lovers alike. Like, we all must keep telling people about this, like, to learn more of what these men went through to fight for our country. So, what do we really take away from Iwo Jima? We can take away that heroism knows no rank or race or that African American Marines helped break barriers through bravery, even when their own country didn't treat them equally. This battle, though fought in the past, it really still teaches us about courage, about unity, and just about sacrifice. And these are my sources. The bottom three were links that I found online, and the top two that are not highlighted, those are two books that I found in our library, and I highly recommend The African American Voices from Iwo Jima. I'm not a big reader, but reading that book really opened my eyes and taught me a lot about all the sacrifices that those men made. But so thank you all for listening and being a part of this journey with me. I would love to hear your thoughts or answer any questions. And just let's keep their memory alive, not just as soldiers, but just as people who shaped the world we live in today. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.